Hello again. Today I'm going to show you how to turn this little piece of foliage into a really different painting with ink and wash using colored ink. So I've decided to do something a little unconventional with this one. I've laid out my subject here in exactly how I want to reproduce it. But you can see these tiny little stems that go up to the berries. To outline them in black and then paint them in, it's a no-go. So I thought what I'd do is use Sharpie markers because they're permanent and draw the stems with these. Unfortunately, if I want to reproduce the color, it's kind of halfway between. So here it's like almost magenta, and then it goes into a redder color, and then down there it gets a little more green. I haven't decided what I'll do about that, but I'm going to start with this for the stems, and for the berries I need my micron pen. So my first impulse is to start by drawing the stem and come this way, because that's the way the plant grows. But I'm not going to do that because you have to draw the thing that's closest to you first because it covers up the things behind. And what I'm going to do with the berries is I'm going to try and draw them all, but I might not. But I do want to do them sort of true to size. So I'm going to just go like, where do I want this? Where do I want this? So I'm going to put the berries over here. And they're not black. They're like navy blue, but I'm just going to draw those in and then I'll put the stems on after. So I'm just being careful to go, okay, which one is where? How are they connected? Which is, I'll be honest, kind of tricky because sometimes you get a little bit lost. And the paper I'm using is a rough watercolor paper. Not sure I'm liking it because it does absorb, like these edges are getting fuzzy. It's not really what I want, so I'm going to persevere anyway. And then afterwards, the ones that are behind the stems, I have to go back in and put those on. All right, I'm going to try this. I think this is very daring. Okay, I know those two are connected. I'm really not liking the Sharpie, I have to tell you that, because it soaks into the paper way too much. Could be the fault of the paper. Obviously, I should have tried the pen on this paper first, but I'm going to persevere anyway. I walked down this alley to go to the library and whatnot, and there's this Virginia creeper. And I love Virginia creepers because my grandmother had one on the side of the house on the farm years ago. They turned so beautiful in the fall. So thinking I was pretty clever, when we moved into this house, I planted one on the front of the house. And it turns out it's a different kind. And it doesn't go these beautiful colors all fall. What it does is turns a little bit red, pinky reddy brown, and then the leaves promptly fall off. Like one wind and they're gone. But the one in the alley is this beautiful red color. So I had to walk down the alley and snip one. Now I'm switching in here to my red one. I may live to regret this color, this pen choice. But you know what? You live and learn, right? Everything doesn't turn out perfectly every time. All right, now let's get on with the big ones. All I'm doing is looking at where everything is in relation to everything else. And this stem, if it's this length, it's about 2.5 times to the center here, so that would make that right about there. So I'll take that down like that, getting these little jags. I have a nice fountain pen that I wanted to use, which I popped in here. My daughter gave it to me. It has red ink in it, and I tried the ink to see if it was water soluble, and it just ran like crazy. So if you're using ink, especially if you're using a fountain pen, be sure to check that it's not water soluble. Otherwise, you might go in with your paint and find that suddenly all your lines have floated away or smeared. Now I am going to be painting this, so fret not. you could leave that just as it is and say, here's my sketch. You could go back in with black if you wanted and outline it and, you know, do whatever, add shadows and whatnot. Okay, I'm going to just put a little bit of this in here and then kind of go over it with the red, because I think the stem is a little too magenta down here. Just go right over it actually. Now keep in mind that I can come back here and paint over this, so I probably will. This is just to sort of knock back that magenta a little bit until you kind of get in here where they are really dark. All right, let's get the paint out. Okay, here's another option. You can just pick up your paint and just like that. Don't even worry about the shapes. Don't worry about, you know, painting in the lines or anything like that. Or you can be precise. I want to start with the berries, so this isn't the brush I want this little guy because they're so little. And the color I'm using is this navy blue, and this is a little palette that I got from Temu actually. So I'm going to paint the berries, and these berries aren't very shiny, but I think I'll probably put a little dot of white on them afterwards. Now, just because I have this little test sheet doesn't mean I remember exactly that I did it that way. I try to kind of control my moving things around, but I always use a piece like this, a piece of watercolor paper that you can try the color on, just to make sure before you start putting paint on your picture that it's going to go in the right place. So I had quite a bit of paint on the brush right then, which is sitting right in there. So I can actually go back and pick it up so that, for one thing, it's not such a blob that it takes so long to dry and then, you know, it doesn't look great. Can kind of reuse the volume that I put on there. Can also, when I pick up my paint, don't put so much water in it so that it has a lot of density of paint. Does that make sense? It's basically thin or thick, you know. It's a ratio of water versus paint. So the more water you have, generally the thinner your paint is, and you know how it works. Do I need to explain that? Okay, I will. The waterier it is, usually the lower value it is, and the value refers to the darkness or lightness. There, see, that's such a much nicer color than black, particularly because they're not black anyway. It's a little more true. And now we paint. My favorite part. Okay, so what I want is definitely alizarin crimson, which is here. And I can mix a little. That is too much. So this is what I do when my palette is so full that I don't have room for any new colors. I just get some tissue, which comes on a handy roll, and I'll just mop some of it out of here so that I have room to work. I'm not going to be using blue right now. I might use some of that purple and pink, but so far I just want the space. Okay. I also want to put a little bit of water in there that I don't have to use my brush to get wet. All right, let's see if I can just speed myself up a little bit here. Okay, now I'm going to compare this to the actual plant. It's pretty close, but it's a little too warm. And that's fine, because we can do something about that. But I want to make a puddle of it here. And then I think I'll put some purple in it and see what that looks like. Well, it kind of dulled it down, so let's get something a little bit brighter. And this is quinacridone rose. That's pretty close. Okay, I'm going to just paint the whole thing with this. And then I can go in afterwards and add some more details if I want to. I'm not being really precise because I prefer a look that isn't precise. Simple as that. I also like a little bit of white to show because I think it just gives it a little bit of sparkle. So I'll run this in here, and the colors of these leaves is actually pretty uniform. There's a little bit of variation with some, old green, but mostly not. So here's the problem, one problem with watercolor you can run into. That is, you didn't mix enough paint. You get the perfect color, but you don't have enough paint mixed up. And then you have to go back in and recreate it, which sometimes comes out the same and sometimes doesn't. And if sometimes it doesn't matter. Like this is a little bit redder, and I think it still looks good. I'm going to move this from my hand. I just want to let you know that there's a link below to my class, and when I published this video, it was still just collecting names of interested people on the waiting list. So if that's you, I would suggest you sign up, and if this is after the fact, you can have a look at the class and purchase it. I'm going to make this one a little bit pinker, just or deeper pink or something, just for variety. It's also quite dense color, so it's a little bit darker value. And the value is how much light is in something. So the darker the value, the less light, and the lighter the value, the more light. It's my highly scientific explanation. And I can do all kinds of things with this, but I'm not going to add very much to it. I do want to go back in here and just darken things up a little bit. Take the water out of the brush, tamp it out. Let this flow by just adding a little wet edge to it. I'll do the same with this one. So this is the process. Clean the brush, use a paper towel, get the color out, make a damp edge, not a really wet one. This one leaf is probably still a little bit wet, but I'm going to do the same thing here. You have to be careful with some colors because you'll lift up what's on the bottom. Now this little guy here is green and red, and so I'm going to start with a bit of green on the bottom, just a tiny bit. The back of the leaf is a little bit green, and the end of this one is a little bit green. This little point down here is a bit green, and let's make this one completely green with a red edge, even though they're red with a green edge, just for accuracy's sake. And then I'll put the red on and let it run into the green. And then you get that perfect mix of red and green that's on the leaf, because it's kind of how it is. This is not scientific, but if you really watch the leaves turn, you'll see that they go deader from the end, I think. Or maybe it's the other way around. Correct me if you know more about this than I do, which could be very easy to be the case. Okay, I'm going to add just more color here. And do the same thing here. So I want it to blend. I don't want it to just be a line. And I think that's all the paint on the leaves that I'm going to do. And I have one more step that I think just kind of pulls it all together. This one is running into the end of my water, so I want to move that end of water down farther. Because as I've explained before, it runs, if you have it dry and you have wet, put a bunch of wet on, it'll run up to the edge of the dry because it can't go any farther. If this is still wet, it'll run into it until it reaches a dry spot, and then it'll bunch up. Basically, the pigment will bunch up and cause a line, and that's when you get watermarks, which can be really lovely, but if it's not what you want, then it's not what you want. Okay, now while I have you, I want to show you something about color and how it flows. So I'm just going to wet this. Tiny bit of color in there, but that doesn't matter. I'm going to take alizarin crimson and drop it on there. See what it does? Now I'm going to take quinacridone rose and see what it does. You notice how different they are? How they bloom? So when you start getting used to watercolor paint, what you could do is just take a strip of watercolor paper like this. Still has a bit of pink in it. And just go through your paints and try them. This one is ultramarine deep. There's a big bloomer. Let's try this purple. It also depends how much water you have, but they don't all act the same. Every color is a little bit different, and it really helps to know that. Let's try this yellow, cadmium yellow deep. See, they'll all bloom a certain amount, but like I said, they're not all the same. All right, there's a little lesson. I just need this to dry. Okay, one thing I could do is I could add a background, and that would mean painting around everything, which is easily doable. It's a little bit slow, but that's okay. You could do it really finely, or you could do it kind of messily, sort of watercolor splashy. Or you could do something completely different. And I'm going to use this ragged old brush and pick up some magenta, a bunch of it, mix it in here with the alizarin crimson, put a little bit more on there, like that, and then just do this. And this acts kind of like a background. It really adds something. If I wanted, I could add another color, but I don't really want to do that because I think it would just be overkill. It would be too much. So it'll take a bit for these splashes to dry, but I think it really enhances it. The other thing I could have done is gone in with the black and done some cross-hatching or shaping or whatever. But this is the project I wanted to do like this. I will go around to my table afterwards and mop up all the paint because I'm actually quite a neat painter, and if things get too messy, I have to clean them up. I like to clean them up because I really don't have a lot of space to like make a big mess. One reminder, please join my floral ink and watercolor class. Second one is please subscribe to my channel, click the little bell, and come back for next time.